Well, hello, it's Andrew here yet again, and this is episode 120. And today we're continuing from where we ended up at the last episode, when Jesus has confronted the scribes and the Pharisees who have expressed their disappointment in him and their desire for miraculous signs. And so we're picking it up at Matthew chapter 16 verses 5 through to 12. Now, Jesus and his disciples have left, they're in the boat together, and when we read in verse 5, when the disciples reached the other side, they'd forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, "Watch out and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." They said to one another, "It's because we've brought no bread." And becoming aware of it, Jesus said, "You of little faith, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered? How could you fail to perceive that I was not speaking about bread? Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he had not told them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. There's some really useful things about this passage. The first thing is that it makes it really clear that the 4,000 and the 5,000 were quite separate events. And they're both recorded in the one gospel. And Jesus references both of them here as separate events. But what we actually see that this passage is about, we start with Jesus and the disciples being on quite different wavelengths. They're thinking about completely different things. They are right in the moment of realizing that they've brought no bread. And they're feeling somewhat ashamed and embarrassed about that. But Jesus is back there. He's back there with the conversation he has just had before he got into the boat with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He's still thinking about that. He's still processing that. And it's out of that he's speaking. But what he does, in a sense, is he addresses both issues in one hit. He addresses also the issue of the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000 and the abundance of God's provision in that moment, in those moments. And he basically says to them, "So why are you worried about bread? You've got no bread. You think that those occasions where we had the 5,000 and the 4,000, that God was able to provide for those? You think that the Lord is not able to provide yet again? Why are you worried about bread?" The thing is, you see, is that the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and now we're switching to what Jesus really did want to talk about, is invasive. It works its way through the whole. Yeast, although it's a great thing in terms of making bread rise, actually permeates the whole. Once it's in, you can't get it back out again. And it has a sense of infecting the flour. It has a sense of infecting the whole. And Jesus is using here yeast in a negative sense. He's using it really as a form of poison. And he is addressing the way that they think and the way that they see. As I said in the last episode, the Pharisees and the Sadducees are looking for the spectacular. They're looking for the large. They're looking for the demonstrative as signs of God's activities. Yet Jesus is showing that God is at work in the small, in the apparently insignificant and the unnoticed. He's at work in the everyday. He's at work in the small things. It's in the moment by moment daily provision. And I know I'm repeating what I said the other day. But Jesus is inviting his disciples to not buy into the perspective of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as it will poison their everyday experience of God. They will always be dissatisfied, like the adulterous ones looking over the fence. They will always be looking for more and failing to recognize that God is at work in the everyday. You start looking for the dramatic and the large, and you miss what God is doing under your very noses. Now, this is something I've spoken on before and probably will repeat, because I think it's something we need to understand and to remember. The words where Jesus says, I think it's in John chapter 5, he says, I only do what I see the Father doing. And I want to suggest to you, and I will, as I say, I've repeated this repeatedly, is that what the Father is doing is what's happening in your life. What the Father is doing is what's happening in my life. The little events, the little encounters, the little accidents, the little coincidences, the little moments of grace and of challenge are things that the Father is doing in our lives, and we need to notice them. You're in the supermarket. My simplest illustration. You see somebody down the end of the aisle. You have a decision to make. Do I want to talk to that person? Or am I pressed for time? Or does I not have the emotional energy, and so I'm going to take the next aisle? I'm sure we've all done it. I'm sure we have. But here's the thing. We have a choice. This is God offering us a choice. It's a choice of encounter. It's a choice of moment. We can say yes, we can say no to it. But I want to suggest that these things don't happen by coincidence. They're divine invitations. They're moments in the everyday when God is inviting us to engage. And once we start noticing and seeing these as invitations from God, we start to see God is actually at work in the little details of my life, in the little moment by moment challenges and invitations which are presented to me. And my question is, how am I going to respond? I get to say yes, I get to say no. But I actually then stop fussing about looking for the grand, looking for the big, looking for the impressive, because I'm starting to notice that it's actually in the everyday small little things that God is profoundly at work in your life and in my life. So don't, says Jesus, don't eat the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It actually goes right back to Genesis 3, back to the initial temptation that God is actually holding out on you, that you're actually supposed to be looking for something that God is not giving you. And in fact, God is giving, is walking, is journeying with us all the time. And the invitation is to start noticing. God bless you.